Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. I hope you're doing well. So this is a talk about sophistry, and if there is one thing that you need in your intellectual ammunition to make your way across the treacherous Mordor lava-filled plains of orc-ridden lies that mostly make up modern political culture, you need to know about sophistry. Now, originally, sophistry simply meant being able to make really good arguments. It didn't have the negative connotation that it has now. Socrates was actually quite complimentary towards some sophists, even sending one of his students to go and learn under a sophist. So there was some good stuff that happened in the realm of sophistry, but it got a progressively worse and worse reputation as time went forward. So for those who don't know, Socrates was one of the earliest philosophers. Philosopher means lover of wisdom, and that means the pursuit of important truths for their own sake, not for the sake of changing or manipulating or getting things out of others. A politician will tell you what you want to hear and will appeal to your vanity and will appeal to your insecurity and it will appeal to your base fears. A lover of wisdom, a philosopher, will find out, seek out, and develop the most relevant and powerful arguments to help you live a better life, and will tell you not what you want to hear, but what, if you wish to pursue virtue, you need to hear. So simply being able to make good arguments doesn't make you a sophist. Socrates, of course, went to the oracle at Delphi and said, "Who is the wisest person in the world?" And the oracle said, "Why, you, Socrates, are the wisest person in the world." And he said, "Well, that can't be right. I mean, I don't really know anything." And but he said, "Well, the oracle can't lie, but I don't know anything. So what could this mean?" So then he went to perform the Socratic reasoning, to ask the series of questions designed to uncover wisdom. He went to all of the leading sophists, all of the leading teachers of his day, and he examined them on what is truth, what is justice, what is virtue, and so on. And as he examined them, he very quickly found out that they didn't know what they claimed to know. They did not know what justice was, or truth, or virtue, or all of the important things that philosophers should know. And so he finally figured it out, what the oracle meant. And the oracle meant that he was the wisest because he knew how little he knew. And the acceptance of ignorance is the beginning of wisdom. When we claim to know something that we simply don't know, when we become invested in falsehood, we build our houses, so to speak, on the cloud castles of irrational superstitions, and then when truth tellers come along, we feel our very identities dissolving. Once someone can get you to build your personality and your identity, your sense of identity, on a lie, you will become an automatic opponent of the truth. And that, of course, is in many ways the goal of a sophist. Now, sophists were very highly paid back in the day. We're talking 2,500 years ago in Athens. They were very highly paid, and they refused to teach people who could not afford their teachings. And so they created a kind of aristocratic class because, of course, Athens was a pretty primitive form of democracy. And to be able to go in front of the public and to write and speak in a way that was appealing to the public, and the public as a whole, based on the bell curve of intelligence, tends not to be overly focused on long-term gains, tends to be focused on short-term gains, which was, of course, inherited by Rome, which created economic seppuku based upon the endless provision of bread and circuses, of the free welfare state for the underclasses, of free bread, and of course the circuses are free entertainments where Christians had a very bad time playing Hello Kitty. So sophists were very expensive and refused to teach people who could not pay them. And in my own small ways, Socrates is one of my greatest influences, which is why I talk to people for free. I give my books away for free, give my podcasts away for free. I do ask for donations, just as Socrates did. Buy me some lunch and let's talk some wisdom. You can go to fdrurl.com/donate to help out this conversation. But Sophism eventually grew into how it's perceived now, which is, really dangerous, slippery snake oil salesman. And sophistry now generally means being able to make a worse argument appear the better argument. And there's a lot of logical fallacies which you can easily look up online to sort of figure out how sophistry works. I want to talk about the philosophy of sophistry, if that makes any sense. This may come, yay, it may come as a bit of a shock to people who think, oh, this is mostly politics and problems. No, this is fundamentally a philosophical channel, so I wanted to do some hardcore philosophy, baby. So, for example, this is a very common example that is often cited by people on the right in America, that when someone criticizes Obama, the people on the left say, well, but George Bush was, was doing this. This is called an ad hominem to cock. And this means basically, if somebody accuses you of something, you turn around and say, well, this person was much worse. And the mob goes over there and stones that guy instead of you. And the fact that it's like basically saying, I'm not hungry because there are hungrier people in the world, which is, of course, there are hungrier people in the world, but this doesn't mean that you're not hungry. So I think it's important to know what sophistry is, and these are my perspectives and arguments, so take them with as many grains of salt as you can conceivably find. But I believe that sophistry is the direct opposite of philosophy, because sophistry attempts to mimic philosophy, and there is no greater enemy to a thing than its predatory mimic, right? So I don't know if you've seen the reboot of Battlestar Galactica with the glowing orgasm backbones, but of course in the original Battlestar Galactica, from when I had hair, this was they were these robots made of big silver aluminum cans, so you knew they were robots and they couldn't blend in. In the second round of Battlestar Galactica, the robots mimic almost perfectly human beings, which makes them incredibly difficult to figure out and ferret out. So they're a greater enemy, so to speak, because they can mimic human beings. And because sophistry strives its very mightiest to imitate philosophy, it is the greatest enemy of philosophy. Like if you bring some rational argument to me, and I say, Montana, ole, fatang, biscuit, barrel, potato head, noogie doogie, then you'll say, well, I'm not sure what you're saying, but I'm pretty sure that's not philosophy. Whereas if I come back with a seemingly rational argument, then you are going to get probably sucked in to my crazy sophist planet and end up making the worst mistake of philosophy, which is to extend the respect of rational argument to people who are not using rational arguments and who are using the opposite of rational arguments, which is something that vaguely looks like a rational argument but is not. Like if some young man pulls out a giant swimming pool flotation ring, and there are cops around, they're going to be like, well, I guess he's going swimming somewhere. I wonder what's going to happen. But if he pulls out a toy gun, then he has a different kind of danger, right? This is a very different situation for the police, or pretty much for anyone around for that matter, because the toy gun looks like a gun and therefore is much more dangerous in its appearance than a big flotation ring. And in the same way, because sophistry looks like philosophy, it's that much more dangerous. And sophistry, of course, involves lying, but in a very subtle way, in a misdirection way. Like the aforementioned argument where I say Obama did something bad, and people say, well, George Bush did something bad or worse or whatever, right? That's not it's not a blarp. It's not just an irrational rainbow spray of subatomic memes. It is a seemingly rational or seemingly empirical response to an argument. And so because sophistry mimics philosophy but sort of corrupts and subverts philosophy, then it is it is much more dangerous. Like, hey, last example. So if I hand you some, Three Witches of Macbeth, bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, goblet of some liquid that is bubbling and smoking and shooting out snake tongues and so on, you're probably going to be unlikely to drink it. But if I say, hey man, have a Coke, and you drink the Coke, but it's got poison in it, the fact that it's camouflaged as something you can drink, it makes it much more dangerous than something that's obvious in that way. Now, there are a few ways that I have found over the years to figure out if you're dealing with somebody who is a sophist. Now, a sophist doesn't have to be somebody who's intellectually committed to misdirection and redirection and fogging and obfuscation and so on. It can be someone who just has those habits. And so it doesn't have to be sort of a Dr. Fu Manchu stroking the bald cat in a giant Captain Kirk chair, Bond villain style of interaction. It just can be somebody who has these habits. These habits can be unconscious. Sophistry fundamentally is the fear of being found out for your motives. And whereas a philosopher wishes to tell you the truth that is relevant, important, and actionable, a sophist wishes to infest you with misdirection and bewilderment and activate your fear response, your fight or flight responses, so that you do what the sophist wants. In my show, I don't tell people what to do. I sort of give them advice or arguments or thoughts or perspectives or evidence or data. I don't tell people what to do. A sophist wants you to do something, and like water going down a mountainside, will find any path to get to the destination. So philosophy, of course, starts with definitions. So if you don't have definitions, then you have a big problem talking about anything. So people talk about, well, what is the good or what is virtue? How should we help the poor? How should people be educated and so on? And if nobody has a definition of what virtue is, then you are in the land of sophistry. So if somebody refuses or avoids definitions, then that is really important. It's good to help the poor. Right? This is what a sophist would say, and would imply that the existing government system of coercive redistribution of wealth, not that wealth is exactly distributed to begin with, but if somebody opposes the welfare state, then the sophist will say, well, then you oppose helping the poor, and you are a cold-hearted, Coke-sponsored monster or whatever. And so that's what the sophist will do, because the question is, what is virtue, has not been defined. So that's fundamentally important as well. People who reject or refuse definitions or want to skate past them or jump over them are almost certainly sophists. People who won't build an argument step by step are almost certainly sophists. So if somebody, like the Socratic questioning is, you continue to ask questions that parse out what the person is trying to say. You try to break down someone's argument into syllogisms or their component parts, right? One of the most ancient syllogism is, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, right? There's an argument, you assemble it, you get to a conclusion that is true. You could say, I'm on a plane to Johannesburg. I'm on a plane. The plane is going to Johannesburg, therefore I am going to Johannesburg. Well, it's an argument that you... So you try to break someone's perspective or argument down into its component parts. If they resist that process, they are a sophist. Because if somebody comes to me and says, Steph, what is virtue? Well, I've got endless podcasts and articles. I've written a whole book on how secular ethics can be justified, called Universally Preferable Behavior, a rational proof of secular ethics. You can get it for free at freedomainradio.com/free. So if somebody comes to me and says, well, Steph, what is virtue? Well, I wrote a whole book on what is virtue and articles and podcasts, and I've had many, many debates on this show about that. I've talked about how to explain it to children and all that kind of stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm right, but it means I have no problem breaking down my argument into its component syllogisms, into the building blocks of what an argument is. And by the way, writing a book on ethics is a confession that beforehand I did not know what ethics is. Some people think I'm arrogant for writing a book on ethics. No. It's a confession of humility. I did not know what ethics was, although I probably thought I lived a good life. I did not know what ethics was until I actually broke it down into its syllogisms, into its arguments all the way from sense data through abstract ethics.